Now, one of the world's greatest enduring mysteries is a mystery no more. For decades, the Bermuda Triangle has captured imaginations with stories of vanishing planes and ships. But now, new scientific theory claims to have finally answered this mystery.
For over a century, the Bermuda Triangle has swallowed ships and planes whole. No wreckage, no bodies, no explanation, just silence.
They remain convinced that this is a dangerous area, all thanks to highly unusual seaweed.
But researchers have discovered that Bermuda has one major difference.
But in 2001, a deep-sea crew that wanted nothing to do with the Triangle's legends accidentally sailed into the middle of its darkest secret. Their job was simple: lower a drone to the seafloor and scan for old shipwrecks. But what that drone captured 700 meters below the surface did not just surprise the experts. It disturbed them. Ancient stone structures sitting on the ocean floor, centuries of shipwrecks surrounding them, and human bones scattered among the wreckage. So what is really down there? And what does it mean for everything we thought we knew about the most feared stretch of ocean on Earth? Let's find out. The triangle that swallows everything. In December 1945, 5 U.S. Navy bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale on a routine training exercise over the Triangle. These were not rookies. They were fully certified Navy aviators with multiple logged combat missions and completed training flights already under their belts. They knew the sky, they knew the route. Within hours, radio contact became confused and panicked. The lead pilot was heard saying he didn't know where they were, that the ocean didn't look right. Then, the signal cut out. All 5 planes vanished. The Navy immediately sent a rescue aircraft with 13 men on board to find them. That plane also disappeared. 27 men, 6 aircraft. Not a single piece of wreckage was ever recovered. Then there is the USS Cyclops. In 1918, a 542-foot Navy cargo ship carrying 309 people sailed into the Triangle and was never seen again. It sent no SOS. It reported no trouble. It just ceased to exist. To this day, it remains the single largest non-combat loss of life in the entire history of the U.S. Navy. The survivors who came close and lived to talk about it reported things that are hard to explain rationally. Compasses spinning on their own, engines dying without mechanical cause, the sky turning a strange, sickly yellow before everything went wrong. When pressure mounted for answers, the U.S. government officially stated that the Triangle was no more dangerous than any other part of the ocean. That statement did not calm anyone down, it made things worse. Because when a government, scientists have proposed methane explosions, rogue underwater currents, and magnetic anomalies. None of those theories has ever fully explained the pattern. And it is the pattern that is most disturbing. Too many disappearances, too clean, too consistent, and every single one of them leaving the same thing behind: nothing. But in 2001, a team of engineers who had no interest in legends or mysteries sailed into these waters for a completely ordinary reason. What they were about to find was anything but. The deal that started everything. In the early 2000s, a Canadian deep-sea exploration company signed a contract with the Cuban government. There was nothing dramatic about it. No press conference, no announcement, just a business deal between 2 parties who both wanted the same thing: money. Cuba sits at the southern edge of the Bermuda Triangle, and the seafloor surrounding the island is essentially an underwater graveyard. Between the 1500s and the 1800s, hundreds of Spanish colonial ships sank in these waters. These were not empty vessels. They were cargo ships loaded with gold, silver, and treasures stolen from the Americas and destined for Europe. Most of them never made it. Storms, battles, and navigational failures sent them straight to the bottom. And there they stayed for centuries, untouched. The Cuban government knew the wealth sitting beneath its waters but lacked the technology to reach it. The Canadian company had the technology but needed access. The agreement was simple: scan the seafloor, locate the wrecks, recover whatever was valuable, and split the findings. Everyone wins. The team assembled for this mission was not a group of adventurers or treasure hunters. They were engineers, marine geologists, and ocean surveyors, professionals who built their careers on hard data and measurable results. The Bermuda Triangle's dark reputation meant absolutely nothing to them. What mattered was the scan data, the fuel schedule, and the recovery timeline. Their tool was a sonar scanning system towed behind the research vessel. It sent sound pulses downward and read how they bounced back. Mud returns a dark flat image. Rock returns a brighter one. By dragging this equipment in slow, overlapping lines across the water, the team built a picture of everything sitting on the ocean floor below them, even in complete darkness. The work was slow, unglamorous, repetitive, Day after day, the crew stared at screens showing exactly what they expected. Gray mud, scattered rocks, the occasional outline of an old wreck. Nothing unusual, nothing worth stopping for. Nobody on that vessel was thinking about disappearing planes or vanishing ships. They were thinking about how many more days of empty screens they would have to sit through before finding something worth reporting back to the client. Then one day, something appeared on the screen that made the entire crew stop breathing. The signal that shouldn't exist. The screens had shown nothing but mud and rocks for days. That was normal, that was expected. So when something different appeared, the crew noticed immediately. Long, straight lines stretched across the sonar display. Not curved, not scattered, straight, and they held a clear, repeating pattern across the seafloor. The first instinct was to assume it was a glitch. Equipment malfunctions happen at sea, data gets corrupted, screens throw up errors. So the team did what any professional would do. They repositioned the ship and ran the scan again from a completely different angle. The lines were still there, unchanged, unmoved, sitting on the ocean floor exactly as they had appeared the first time. That is when the mood on the ship began to shift. Because in sonar work, when something survives a second scan from a different angle, it is not a glitch anymore. It is real. And whatever this was, it was sitting 700 meters below them, holding its shape with a consistency that the natural ocean floor simply does not produce. Then the team looked closer at the data and found the detail that truly unsettled them. The scans were picking up shadows behind the shapes. In sonar imaging, shadows mean one specific thing. They mean the object casting them has height and physical mass. It is rising above the surrounding seafloor. Flat sand cannot produce a shadow. Loose debris cannot produce a shadow. Only something solid and upright casts a shadow in acoustic imaging. Whatever was down there was not lying flat. It was standing. The team pulled up their reference database and started comparing. They checked the readings against known shipwreck signatures. Shipwrecks break apart when they sink. The debris spreads and scatters in all directions, creating uneven, irregular patterns on the sonar. What they were seeing was nothing like that. They checked coral reef formations next. Coral grows in rounded organic shapes that follow no straight line. Again, no match. They checked volcanic rock clusters and underwater landslide debris. Both produced jagged, random shapes with no consistency. None of it matched what was on their screen. What was on their screen had clean edges. The spacing between the shapes was consistent. The geometry repeated in a way that natural underwater formations do not repeat. The ocean floor does not organize itself. Currents, pressure, and time make everything down there messy and unpredictable. But this was not messy. This was ordered. The crew sat with that reality for a while. Nobody rushed to conclusions out loud. These were scientists and engineers trained to follow data, not feelings. But the data was leading them somewhere deeply uncomfortable. According to reports from those involved, the atmosphere on the ship changed completely at this point. People stopped making small talk. They just stared at the screen. The longer they looked, the harder it became to avoid the one word that kept pushing its way into the room. A word none of them wanted to say out loud. Structure. Sonar can tell you something is there. It cannot tell you what it is. And what this team needed now was eyes. Real eyes sent 700 meters into the dark. The descent into darkness. The team made a decision that nobody took lightly. They were going to send a camera down there, not a person, a machine. Specifically, a remotely operated vehicle, commonly called an ROV. This was not a simple underwater camera strapped to a cable. An ROV of this class costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to build and operate. It is designed and assembled by specialist engineers whose entire job is building equipment that can survive conditions that would destroy anything ordinary. The frame is built to withstand crushing underwater pressure. The lights are engineered to cut through total darkness at extreme depth. The cameras are built to function in an environment where no natural light has ever reached. Every single component is tested and verified before deployment because at 700 meters deep, there is no repair crew. There is no recovery team. If something goes wrong down there, the machine is gone forever. That financial reality made the decision a serious one. This was not a casual move. The team checked every system on the ROV before it went into the water. Every cable connection, every camera feed, every light, because one small failure at that depth meant losing an irreplaceable piece of equipment and getting no answers at all. When the checks were done, they lowered it in. The ROV entered the water and began its descent. For the first few meters, there was still color, blue water, scattered light filtering down from the surface. fish moving past the camera lens. It almost looked peaceful. Then the color started draining away. The blue faded to gray. The gray faded to black. By the time the robot passed a few dozen meters down, the surface world had already disappeared completely above it. At 200 meters, the last trace of natural sunlight was gone. The ocean at that point is not dim. It is not dark in the way a room is dark at night. It is a complete and total absence of light, the kind of darkness that has never once been touched by the sun.
At 400 meters, the pressure pressing against the outside of the ROV was already 40 times greater than normal atmospheric pressure at the surface. That is enough force to collapse a human ribcage instantly. The crew on the surface sat watching the monitor feeds in near silence. The only sounds in the room were the slow hum of the cable reel paying out line and the occasional low creak of the ship moving on the water above. Nobody was talking. Everyone understood what they were watching. They were sending a machine into a place that human eyes had almost certainly never seen before, at least not at this specific location. Fine particles drifted constantly past the camera as the ROV descended further. Microscopic debris that falls slowly from the surface world in a permanent, endless drift downward. It gave the footage an unsettling quality, as if the machine was sinking through something that had been completely undisturbed for a very long time. Then the seafloor came into frame, and it looked nothing like what 700 meters of ocean should contain. What the cameras captured in the next few minutes would rewrite everything the team thought they knew and shake the scientific community to its core. What the drone actually found. The seafloor came into view, and the first thing that hit the crew was the size of what they were looking at. These were not small rocks. They were not scattered debris or broken coral. They were massive stone blocks, some of them several meters wide, sitting on the ocean floor 700 meters below the surface. And their surfaces were flat.
Not roughly flat, the way natural rock can sometimes appear. Flat in the way that only happens when something has been deliberately cut and smoothed. The crew leaned closer to the monitors. The blocks had edges, sharp, clean, clearly defined edges that had not been rounded by erosion or cracked apart by the pressure of the deep ocean. These edges looked the same way the edge of a building looks. Precise, intentional, the kind of precision that takes effort to produce. What made it worse was the arrangement. The blocks were not scattered randomly the way rocks and geological debris always are on the ocean floor. Many of them sat in straight lines with consistent gaps between them. The spacing held, it repeated. Ocean currents do not do that. Earthquakes do not do that. The results do not mean that information is literally traveling backward in time, but they suggest that the relationship between events may not always follow the simple timeline we experience in everyday life. Instead of a straightforward chain of cause and effect, the quantum world sometimes behaves in ways that appear to blur the boundary between past and present. Each of these discoveries challenges a different assumption about how time and causality are supposed to work. Individually, they might be explained as unusual quirks of modern physics, but taken together, they suggest that time may not behave like a simple, universal clock that ticks the same way everywhere. At 700 meters deep, fine sediment falls constantly from the water above and slowly buries everything on the seafloor over thousands of years. Ancient shipwrecks at depths far shallower than this are consumed by coral, barnacles, and sea life within decades, but these blocks had nothing growing on them. No coral, no barnacles, no thick blanket of sediment covering their surfaces. Their corners were still visible, their edges were still sharp. Whatever these were, the ocean had not done to them what it does to everything else. Then the drone's camera moved further across the seafloor, and the discovery changed completely. Surrounding the stone structures were the broken remains of old ships, rotted timber hulls half buried in the sediment, fractured wooden beams, the unmistakable shapes of vessels that had gone down and never come back up. They sat right alongside the ancient stone blocks as if the seafloor had been collecting them for centuries. And then, among the wreckage, the camera caught something that made the crew go completely silent. Bones. Human skeletal remains settled into the sediment next to the ruins of ships that were never supposed to end up here. People had died in this exact spot. More than one person, from more than one vessel, from more than one era. The structures, the ships, the bones, none of it had a clean explanation. But the deeper question was not what was down there. It was how long it had all been waiting to be found. By recreating extremely high-energy conditions, researchers can observe particles that normally exist only for tiny fractions of a second before disappearing. These short-lived particles provide clues about the deeper structure of the universe and the laws that govern it. Most of the time, the results of these collisions are chaotic and difficult to interpret because dozens of particles may appear and vanish within moments of impact. But hidden inside the massive streams of data produced by these experiments are patterns that reveal how the fundamental forces of nature operate. Over the years, some of those patterns have raised new questions about the nature of time and causality. One area of interest involves extremely short-lived particles known as top quarks, which are among the heaviest particles ever observed. Top quarks exist for such a tiny fraction.
They were small, scattered nomadic groups who moved from place to place hunting animals and gathering food.
As the products of their decay to construct what happened during the collision. When pairs of these particles are produced together, physicists sometimes observe correlations between them that persist even after they separate and decay. These correlations suggest that the particles remain linked through quantum entanglement, even though they were created in extremely violent collisions and moved apart almost instantly. Another reason the Large Hadron Collider attracts so much attention is that it operates at energy levels that allow scientists to test theories about the fundamental structure of space and time themselves. Some theoretical models suggest that space and time may not be perfectly smooth and continuous. Instead, they could have an underlying structure at extremely small scales, sometimes described as a kind of quantum fabric that governs how matter and energy interact. If such structures exist, then high-energy collisions could reveal subtle clues about how time behaves at the smallest possible distances. One of the most famous discoveries at the Large Hadron Collider occurred in 2012, when scientists confirmed the existence of the Higgs boson, a particle associated with the field that gives mass to other particles. This discovery completed a major piece of the standard model of particle physics and demonstrated that the collider could successfully reveal previously unknown aspects of reality. Yet even after this milestone, many of the biggest questions about the universe remain unanswered. Glitches in reality. Up to this point, most of the anomalies surrounding time have come from controlled scientific experiments. But outside of laboratories, another category of strange events has quietly gained attention over the years. These events are often described as glitches in reality, moments where people claim that something about time or memory does not behave the way it normally should. One of the most widely discussed examples is known as the Mandela effect. The term refers to situations where large groups of people remember something a certain way, even though historical records show that those memories are incorrect. The name itself comes from a false memory that circulated widely on the internet, where many people believed that South African leader Nelson Mandela. In reality, Mandela was released from prison in 1990 and later became president of South Africa. But the number of people who shared the same incorrect memory led some observers to wonder how so many individuals could recall the same event never actually happened. Since then, similar examples have been discussed across the internet and in psychological research. Some people claim to remember alternate versions of famous logos, movie lines, or brand names that do not match official records. In some cases, the differences are small details such as spelling variations or design changes that people insist they remember differently. Psychologists generally explain these situations as false memory formation, which occurs when the brain fills in gaps in memory using patterns that feel familiar. Human memory is not a perfect recording of past events. Instead, it is a reconstruction that the brain builds using fragments of information, expectations, and assumptions. Because of that, people can develop very strong memories of events that never happened exactly the way they recall them. But the reason the Mandela effect attracts so much attention is that some of these cases involve very large groups of people who share the same incorrect memory. When thousands or even millions of individuals report remembering the same detail differently, the phenomenon begins to feel more mysterious than a simple memory error. Some people have suggested that these shared memories could represent alternate timelines or change in reality. although there is currently no scientific evidence supporting that idea. Most researchers view the Mandela effect as a fascinating example of how human memory works rather than proof that time has been altered. Still, the phenomenon highlights something important about the relation between time and perception. Our understanding of the past depends entirely on the reliability of memory and records. If either of those sources becomes uncertain, then the timeline of events can appear far less stable than we usually assume. Stories about glitches in reality extend beyond shared memory. Over the years, many people have described strange experiences where these experiences are often shared online, communities dedicated to unexplained events, where people describe encounters that feel like brief breaks in the normal flow of reality. But even when these experiences can be explained by psychology, they still contribute to the growing cultural fascination with the idea that reality might not be stable. The reason these stories resonate with so many people is that they touch on a deeper uncertainty about how time and memory actually work. Every person experiences